Hello and welcome back to the channel. Some of you guys have requested that I do a post-processing tutorial. Well, here it is. In this tutorial I'll show you step by step how I edit my Milky Way images. In this example we'll use a stacked and tracked sky set and we'll blend that with a separately shot foreground. However, you can use most of these techniques also on your single exposures and your tracked only images. This is a pretty long one, so I've included chapters with timestamps in the video description below. This makes it easy for you to rewatch or skip to a certain part of this tutorial you are interested in. Alright, let's dive right in. Let's begin with processing the sky shots. You can see I've made 10 sky exposures and 1 foreground exposure. For the sky shots I'll pick a shot just somewhere in the middle. For example this one, you can see I've shot at f4 20mm and ISO 1600 of all my 10 shots. In the develop module I'll first go all the way down and enable profile correction and remove chromatic aberration. And chromatic aberration gets rid of those blue and purple fringing around your stars. I'll also make sure that it is not sharpening at this moment. We'll fix that later after we process the whole image. You immediately notice that my image is pretty red. That's because I'm using an Astro modified camera which picks up a lot more red than a regular stock camera to pull out those H-alpha details in these nebula. So obviously we'll have to fix the white balance. I have some presets for it, but normally somewhere around a temperature of 2500 and -40 works for my camera. A normal stock camera will work mostly around temperatures of 4000, I think. And to check your white balance, you can also increase your saturation to almost 100%. And if all colors are visible in a kind of equal way, then you know you're good. Then for example, if you edit it a bit like this, then you immediately see, oh, that's way too red, which wasn't super obvious here. So let's keep this at 2500. You can also adjust a bit of your color balance if you aren't happy. For example, these greens here on the horizon, these are actually air glow, so I want them to remain. But if you have some weird colors, you can also, of course, for example, just desaturate that a bit. My specific camera doesn't handle aquas too well, so I'll always pull that to 100, to the blue. Otherwise, I think we are done. Optionally, you can do a bit of tone and presence editing here already, but I prefer to do that with a cleaner stacked file after this. Okay, I am happy with this pre-processed version of the sky shot. What I'll now do, right mouse click, and I'll copy those settings, because make sure to check them all. And I want to sync that over all of our sky shots so that all the 10 shots are processed equally. I'll now select those 10 shots and export them as a tiff file. I choose a tiff file, not a JPEG file, because a tiff file contains all of the information and it will be intact when we process this one further after stacking. I'll make sure the compression is at none, 16 bits, color space sRGB. I push export and then we'll go on to stacking. Alright, so we just exported our 10 sky shots, which we are now going to stack. I use the software Sequator, which is free. It's only available for PC, but there's also a Mac variant, which is called Starry Landscape Stacker, which costs $30 or something, but it basically does the same. I have exported the TIFF files here. I just select them and drag and drop them into Sequator, and these are star images. After that I'll name the output file, which I'm going to put in the Starscaper tutorial. I'll call the output file stacked. And the settings I normally use are here in the composition aligned stars. I'll select best pixels. My sky area is in this case. Yeah, you have to fill in, you have to tell the software what is sky and what is foreground, so that the software knows, hey, what do I need to stack. So okay, this is my sky area roughly. You don't have to be super precise. This is fine. I'll leave the auto brightness off, high dynamic range off. I will remove dynamic noises because my camera, my 10-year-old camera produces a lot of them, and it gets rid of those for a bit. I also reduce distortion effects. If you select complex, it will try to correct some of the wide angle distortion effects of the stars, specifically in your corners. The stars are sometimes prolonged, or if you have coma, it gets rid of that just a bit here. So it, yeah, in my experience, it helps. I don't want to reduce light pollution. I don't like that effect really in Sequator, and I like to do that myself if necessary. Yeah, for the rest, it's all basic standard settings. And we'll push start, and this will then process for about a minute. Alright, that is done, completed successfully, which is good. We can now see a preview, and immediately I can see Sequator has done a very good job of stacking the 10 shots together. Yeah, let's compare a the stacked shot here at the left and a single shot at the right. The single shots, because they are tracked in a very dark area, are yeah, pretty clean already. But what you can see is on the left hand we have a lot less noise, so we can stretch the data further. And also yeah, things like here airplane trails are removed from the stacked result, so we have a super clean starting file to work with. Okay, so we have our stacked image now, so we're going to process that further. I mainly do that in Photoshop. What you could do at this moment is introduce a star mask, for example with StarNet, but I'm not going to explain that in this tutorial, perhaps somewhere in the future. So yeah, right click, export, right click, edit in Adobe Photoshop 2022. Okay, here we are in Photoshop. Photoshop decided it needed to update, always when you need it the least. Let's first duplicate this layer so that we can always revert to our original version if we screw it up somewhere along the way. What we first want to do is stretch this image a little bit. So I push Ctrl L for levels, and we want to bring in the shadows here quite a bit because this is only the foreground, which I don't need, and you don't want to clip the blacks in the sky, and this is the sky starting here and ending here. Alright, and after this we'll do a curves adjustment. This is called stretching. What we basically want to do, this small peak, we want to stretch that data, so yeah, pull it out a bit. And we do that by just dragging on the curve here. Don't overdo this. So yeah, that's our first stretch. You can see here the original, which looks pretty flat, and our stretched file. Yeah, I think this looks pretty good already. I will fix the oversaturation in a minute. But first let's do some camera raw global adjustments. Yeah, what do I think? I think it's a bit funky on the green, and it's a bit more, maybe a bit too warm. I think I'll cool it off just a bit by adjusting the temperature slider and perhaps introduce a little bit more, yeah, to the pink instead of the green here. I also want to get rid of a bit of that saturation because it looks a bit too funky for my taste. Yeah, okay. Do we need contrast? Yeah, maybe a bit of contrast. I can pull the shadows back a bit. Maybe it looks good. The highlights, I want to reduce that, especially for the horizon line. And I'll pull out the whites a bit more so that it will accentuate the Milky Way better. Yeah, so basically from here to here. Okay, alright. After this I'll do a Ctrl-Shift-Alt-E, or I'll stamp the visible layer to a new layer. Okay, so we've done some global adjustments. I'll now do some local adjustments, also using camera raw. I want to even out this horizon line just a bit, and after that we'll work on the Milky Way. But first let's see if we can reduce the haze and the light pollution on the horizon line just a bit. Okay, so I'm only looking to what it does at the horizon line. I'll reduce the highlights. Yeah, that pulls it down a bit. I'll also dehaze it. Yeah, you can see it already get rid of the haze. Dehazing also introduces a lot of saturation, which doesn't look natural at all, in my opinion. But it's all a matter of taste. This is just one way of doing it. It's not the best or the only way. So I'll just desaturate it. So okay, this was the before and this was the after, and it looks good. Now I don't want to apply these to the entire image. I only want to apply it to the horizon line. So I'm going to add a layer mask, which it has done now, and then I'll select a brush with a normal mode, opacity 100% and flow of 100%. I'll invert Ctrl-I the layer mask. Black conceals, white reveals, and I'm going to brush white on it. So if I press X, you can see that my brush is now white. I'll make it a bit larger, and we're going to brush some white on this. Yeah, so you can see it applies the effect only to the parts I'm brushing in right now. Okay, it's not perfect, but it's getting there. Or not too perfect, but too better. Yeah. Okay, so this was the before and this is the after. I think I like this one a bit more, perhaps. Yeah. No. You can always brush back in some of the original file, which I am doing here. I think this looks better. And you can see the brush, the mask you've created. Okay. So we're making a stamp visible layer again. Perhaps I'll reduce the saturation a bit more because it's all too colorful for my taste. So I'm going back into camera raw. I'll do a desaturate. Yeah, this is getting a bit better. Yeah. Before and after. Alright. Just some minor tweaking. Perhaps I'm taking too much time for this tutorial right on this. Alright, stamp visible again, and now let's work on the Milky Way. So we're going back to filter camera raw, and we are going to introduce some clarity, which will make the Milky Way pop, as they say it. Okay, you see what I mean. If we increase the clarity, you can see that the micro contrast in the Milky Way gets a lot better. You can also do a bit of dodging and burning, but I think it's so arbitrary what you enlighten and what you darken that the clarity slider is a bit more natural perhaps. I think I might also increase the whites. Yeah, this looks good, and maybe decrease the blacks a bit for a bit more added contrast. No, I'll leave it there. Look at the Milky Way. It was before and this is after. It's a bit overdone, but we'll fix that later. We're going to apply a layer mask again. Ctrl Y, so it becomes black, and we are going to brush only over the Milky Way because I don't want this effect applied everywhere. So it's a bit too obvious perhaps what we've done here, so I'll reduce the opacity of this layer maybe. Yeah, this looks better. This was the before and this was the after. Maybe I'll brush out some of the edges because it looks, it's a bit too obvious maybe. that it's edited so much. Okay, before, after, before, after. Yeah, maybe the dark horse can be a bit more. Oh, yes. All right. Before, after. Yeah, this is beginning to look pretty good. Okay, so with all these adjustments, you can see the stars are also very bright compared to the original file. Yeah, the stars weren't popping that much, so I want to reduce the stars a bit so the Milky Way will show better. So I'll do a Ctrl-Alt-E, stamp visible layer again, and we are going to reduce the stars. I do that by select a color range, and then I'll select the highlights. Yeah, and I'll just drag these sliders until you are selecting most of the stars but not the whole sky, something like this. And you can see that it is selecting right now. I'll go back to select and do a modify feather on this selection so that it will be a bit more natural. And we will apply a minimum filter, which is under the menu filter, other, and minimum. It depends on your camera yeah, how many pixels or sub-pixels is good to reduce. In my opinion, for my camera, 0.4 pixels is yeah, a pretty good result. I'll click OK, and let's see what it does. Alright, I'll click Ctrl D for deselect, and you can see immediately that the Milky Way is coming out more, and the whole image is getting a bit calmer, a bit more tranquil, if you will. And this is the before and this is the after. So the stars are pushed back to the background, which, yeah, you can see the Milky Way showing up even better. I think this lens is a bit less sharp around the edges, so I might do another layer of star reduction, but then only for the edges. So I'll stamp visible again. Adding a layer mask right here, Ctrl Y for inverting the layer mask, and we're going to brush over it. A nice big brush. We only want it here around the edges where the stars appear just a bit too large in my opinion. Alright, so before and after. That looks a lot better, I think. Yeah, I think we are beginning to get somewhere around the point where I think it is finished. Yeah, I still think it's a bit too saturated. It's a bit too much for my taste. I actually wanted a layer mask because I want to remain the Milky Way a bit more colorful. With a black brush I'll brush out some parts of the Milky Way so the Milky Way will remain colorful. Here at the horizon line it looks a bit weird, so I'll brush in again. Okay. Yeah, looks good. Okay, let's see if we can make the Milky Way pop just a little bit more. I think it's still a bit flat. Yeah, just by increasing the whites, I think it does a really nice job of introducing a bit more pop. Yeah, actually I only want that. Maybe I'll apply this globally even, because it just looks better, right? Okay, my stars are getting a bit too large, so we'll do just another round of star reduction. Yeah, this looks much better. Yes, definitely. All right. Okay, Ctrl Shift Alt E. What we can also do now is apply a bit of a Gaussian blur, which is an effect which makes it a bit more dreamy. You can like it or you don't. Sometimes I like it on my images, sometimes not. Yeah, basically you want this slider to be that you can see some of the brightest stars, but not all. Somewhere around here is, that's fine, perhaps a little bit less. Okay, and I'll make a levels adjustment of this layer because we want to add some glow. That's what the Gaussian blur basically is. And we'll pull that middle thing just a bit more to the right so that we get a very contrasty glowing scene. And this looks awful, of course, but if we change the opacity to just a couple of %, we can make the effect very subtle. This is without, this is with, without, with. So it gives it a nice dreamy feel and a bit more contrast in this case. I like it. Alright, so the last step in Photoshop, what you can do is apply some sharpening and noise reduction. It actually doesn't need a lot of noise reduction, I think. But let's see if we can improve on it just a little bit. Yeah, here in the detail tab, I'll sharpen it to around 40. These settings are fine. I'll do the masking of 40. Also noise reduction maybe around 25. Let's check what it does. This is without and this is with. Without, with. Yeah, it's pretty good. Pretty good. Okay, I'm happy with this. Alright, so this is our image sharpened. Another time Ctrl Shift Alt E to stamp visible, and then we'll save it. And we go back to Lightroom to maybe just do a bit more final tweaking. We are back in Lightroom now. Yeah, the image is actually pretty good as it is, but what I like to do, I like to use a tool which is called Nik Effects. In this case, a subtool that is Color Effects Pro, and we'll apply some minor things which will bring out the Milky Way perhaps even a bit more. Alright, yeah, there are some options here in this Nik tool, some of which I actually really like. In this case, the color range, contrast color range works pretty well, I think. Here, see what it does. You can actually select some colors which will pop a bit more. This is maybe a bit too much, but yeah, if you select the reds, this is without, this is with, I think it just makes it a bit more pop. Yeah, it makes, yeah, good. Alright, I'll add another filter, and that is the local contrast, or it is called Pro Contrast here. Yeah, and I mainly use this to increase some dynamic contrast, which is basically the clarity, but it works a bit different in Camera Raw. And you can see what it does here. I don't like it everywhere on the image, but just a bit on the Milky Way itself would be cool. But not on the global image, so I'll add some control points, basically a sort of mask where you can say, okay, where do I need to apply this effect? Well, it's basically here, and not too much up, because I don't like it too much there. It's all just a matter of feeling, a matter of taste. This is without, this is with, without, with. I think we improved pretty much. This was the original with the contrast color range added and a bit of pro contrast added. yeah, it just made that image look a bit better, which is what we want, of course. And we've put in all the effort. We want the best image possible. Yes, there it is. Okay, this is the sky shot done. Let's move on then to the foreground. Alright, this is the shot I made of the foreground a little later that night. And you can see that the Milky Way has moved on a bit more to the right, but the shot was planned while it was around here. And I made a screenshot with photo pills to check if the Milky Way was on the right spot here. Yeah, basically I'll just do some basic editing, which isn't all that exciting. I'll just fix the white balance. It looks a bit weird. Maybe a bit more green, maybe a bit more to the blue. I'll pull out some shadows, specifically in the foreground. The highlights, we can reduce those quite a bit. Oh, actually I just forgot to enable my profile corrections because it's a manual lens. Goes. I think it's a bit too green, it's also a bit too light, maybe some more contrast. I don't like to have too much saturation in my foreground, because if you are there at night you definitely don't see the green grass. So I'll just pull that down quite a bit. Okay, yeah, pretty happy with this. Maybe a bit more clarity. No. Cool it off just a bit more. Maybe I reduce the saturation a bit too much. Okay, I will sharpen this image because I am not going to stack it. I don't want to globally sharpen the image, but just the parts I want to sharpen. So if I hold my Alt key, I'll mask the sharpening as I speak. The white is sharpened, so somewhere around here, so it won't sharpen the noise. Basically, that's the most important thing. Okay, pretty happy with this. Let's go into Photoshop, edit in Photoshop, and blend the foreground with the sky. We are back in Photoshop. I'll start with duplicating the background layer so that we can revert if necessary again. I was thinking of a square crop, a 1:1. So what I'll do, I'll just select the how's it called, the crop tool, and I want a 1:1 ratio. Yeah, somewhere around here, I think. Let's zoom out a bit. Yeah, maybe we can cut off a bit here at the bottom, because it doesn't really add to the image in my opinion. Okay, the Milky Way will be around here. Okay, yeah, and I also want to fill this black area with stars so that we can tell the sky replacement later what is the sky and what is the foreground. So I'll check this content aware fill and I click OK. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we are going to stamp visible. The next step now is to make a sky mask so that Photoshop knows where to put our sky. There is a tool which is called sky replacement. Pretty controversial, I know, but we're not going to talk about that. I always want to make sure that my sky and foreground blends are as realistic as possible, and sometimes I take a bit more creative freedom. But it's going to blend. I know from experience that I will have to clone out some of the stars around the horizon line, because otherwise those stars will show up in our blended image. So I'm going to do that first. Okay, I've decided I am a bit lazy tonight. We'll just leave them in and see how Photoshop can deal with it. So what we do now, we go to Edit and then Sky Replacement, and this will basically use some sort of artificial intelligence to look for us what the sky is and what the foreground is, and it will make a mask, and you can then blend your sky image with your foreground pretty easily. Okay, this is not the sky we wanted. We first have to add the sky we just edited, the stacked edit file. Alright, I just added our sky we edited just before. It's done a pretty decent job. You can move it around a bit. You can see the horizon line here. I wanted it to be somewhere around here. Perhaps I'll scale it down just a little bit, because I've shot this with a 12mm lens and the sky with a 20mm lens. So let's make it as realistic as possible. Yeah, somewhere around 90% will be better, I think. Yeah, definitely. And we'll crop that out just a bit later. Alright, you can play around with these settings if you want. I think it's just a bit too green. We'll fix that later. Let's just remain that at 50. The foreground lighting, is it getting better or worse? There's no lighting adjustment at all, and this is a lot of lighting adjustment. This looks maybe a bit more natural. Edge lighting, what does that do? Yeah, I think it's better to reduce that a bit so that your horizon looks more realistic. Color adjustment of the foreground, I think we're not going to do that at the moment. What you can do now, you can zoom in and you can help the mask, because sometimes it doesn't know what foreground is and what sky. So for example, you can expect to see some stars shine through the roof here. I can already see it, and you want to brush that out. So we click here, this brush, and make the brush a little bit bigger, and if you hold Alt you can erase some of the areas which it thinks it is sky. So we're going to do that around the edges, so it makes it a bit more clean. It's done a pretty good job already, and I think for the sake of this tutorial I'll leave it at that. It's done a pretty decent job of blending it together. We'll have to fine-tune a bit more. Stamp visible, and we'll crop that just a bit. There was just a bit too much foreground there anyway. Or perhaps not. There's something like this. Okay. I definitely think it's still way too green, especially the foreground. Alright, we're getting there. I'll save this and I'll work on it just a little bit more, I think, in Lightroom. Okay, so here's a shot back in Lightroom. I think the foreground can be a bit more cooler and a bit less green, so I'm going to use a masking here in Lightroom. You can also actually select the sky, and most of the time it does a pretty decent job. Let's see. Yeah, it's done pretty well, but we want to invert it because I actually want to select the foreground, and you can see it did pretty well. I want to cool that off. Yeah, this looks a lot more like the night, right? I also want to reduce the green a bit in this tint, and maybe even reduce the saturation as a whole. Okay, yeah, this looks much better, much more natural. Maybe I'll pull out the shadow detail a bit more. Yeah, so we've gone from this to this. I just like the color balance a bit more. Okay, we can do a whole lot of other stuff if you want. I can spend hours, even days on one photo, but I think we are there for this tutorial. We've gone from this sky shot and this foreground shot to this end result. I think especially in astrophotography, post-processing makes a lot of difference. Thank you guys for watching. I really hope you've learned something. If you have questions, please drop a comment below and I hope I can answer them. See you on the next one.